Mr. Schmidt, I just want to look, I know that we've had several iterations of this line of questioning, but I do think it's important that we get a bit of clarity on the degree of urgency, if you like. So I just want to walk you through, just for the benefit of getting this on the record and for the committee. When did you first raise the issue of non-compliance with the government's cybersecurity standards with the government?
I would have raised it there's an annual attestation which is published each year in the annual report. So there's one this year and in the previous annual report. Prior to that, there would have been 2 years of budget bids as part of the budget process. I can't recall whether we called out in those bids compliance. I'm not even quite sure what the standard would have been at that point, but it's not a new issue.
So in terms of the kind of the benchmark standards that are in place now, they've known for what, at least 6 months, 12 months perhaps, or even longer?
Sorry for interrupting you. For at least 2 annual reports, it's been a very clear statement that we're not compliant with the government cybersecurity policy.
Okay. And the business case for the 22 million to bring the cybersecurity standards up to scratch, when was that submitted?
That was lodged earlier this year as part of the budget process for the current financial year we're now in. So, but it was the 4th in a series of budget bids which have been lodged since I've been Commissioner.
And was there subsequent communication between you and the government on the urgency of this funding to hit the deck, if you like, in order to comply with the cybersecurity standards? We certainly, I had some initial discussions with senior Treasury and DPC officials, and then there's ongoing discussions between my officials and Treasury officials as the budget bids go through the process. And as part of those discussions, there would have been reference, or certainly in the business case, there would have been reference to the non-compliance. And the fact that, given the passage of time, the urgency was escalating and, you know, in other words, we need this money ASAP if you want us to comply, was that the flavour of the comms? Well,
I think the language would be, things have been a cumulative thing over a number of years. We can do a certain amount if we get a certain amount of money at a point in time, and we would as part of the discussions, we would often, the business case would often reference previous bids which had been unsuccessful, so we hadn't been able to do things. But this has been a continuum to discussions through the budget process.
So it's now off into this, for want of a better word, black box sort of situation under the digital restart program. And we heard evidence earlier today. There was, in response to questioning from Adam Searle earlier this week, earlier in the estimates process, Mr. Wells from Digital responded to Mr. Searle, and he says, because they talk about an assurance review process. So Searle says to him, when do you anticipate the assurance and review process will be finalised? Mr. Wells responds, that really does depend on the Electoral Commission's actioning of those critical recommendations as part of the assurance process. That is a process that all agencies go through. It is part of getting business cases approved. So the implication from the answer is that it's really on the Electoral Commission to come up with the goods and tell us why they need this in this assurance process. Can you sort of enlighten us about that? I would welcome unpacking some of that. And this is, you know, I'm obviously expressing a little bit of frustration. And I'll read from a summary document in a moment. But as I said earlier in my testimony today, one of the bits of advice that one of my officials had when this was first raised with with the Digital Restart Fund people was, why are you bringing this proposal to us? You don't qualify. And as I gave evidence earlier today, that was on the basis that the Digital Restart Fund is meant for specific types of projects which are short-lived,
the Commission's underlying need is for ongoing funding to build capacity. But this will give you the flavour of the world I'm living in. This is, as you referred to a review, there was a Gate 2 review report prepared by Department of Customer Service. We had to pay for people to be brought in externally to conduct the review. And I'll just, a couple of excerpts. So it starts off, the intent of the cybersecurity project is to protect the New South Wales Electoral Commission from cybersecurity risks, including the significant risk of external interference in election processes. Fantastic. The New South Wales Electoral Commission has been using existing funding to do what it can to increase its cybersecurity maturity, but additional funding is essential to address this significant risk and the issues around low maturity of systems and processes. The business case presents a strong case for change and outlines how cybersecurity represents the highest corporate risk for New South Wales. We'll skip along. While the urgent need for investment in cybersecurity is evidenced, the business case in its current form does not present a clear path in the form of a detailed roadmap and a realistic schedule. And what it then goes on to say is to point out the very constraints that I've always worked with. So I have a limited number of subject matter experts who I can take off, for example, at the moment running elections to plan and implement what the money is being spent on, as distinct from if I'd been given the money on the 1st of July and it's now November, and it's anticipated this money may not flow until February next year. So we're only a couple of months away from the end of the financial year. So they recognise the business load, the shortage of subject matter experts, the limited, the changes, the freeze changes for our systems we have to implement when major election events are on. Here we are, it's local government. We'll come out of local government next year. We'll be doing preparations for the state general election. We will have to freeze. So sympathy is expressed. The problem is identified and reflected back to you, but the very inability to do some of the things you would expect to be able to deliver the outcome is caused by the fact we haven't been funded adequately to do it in the first place. It's a circle. It's a circle of hell.
Can I just take you to that, to Mr. Schmidt, because what we heard in evidence earlier today from the Premier was that, look, it is something that we're concerned about, and it was sort of put off into the sort of process issue. It's all about the funding model and whether the process is adequate, and we need to look into this. But what I'm trying to drill down and ascertain off you now is that this is, I mean, we've got an existential threat in 4 weeks' time. There's local government elections afoot. And what I'm hearing is that we probably won't be able to comply with the government's own standards on cybersecurity. So I'm asking you here now, can the people of New South Wales feel confident that these elections, keeping in mind that we've got people who may want an uptake in voting because of the reluctance from the aftermath of COVID and all the rest of it, can those electors of New South Wales, can the people of New South Wales feel confident that their electoral system is not vulnerable to a cyber attack, given what you've put on evidence here today and earlier?
And my apologies, I'll repeat something I said earlier today. In the world we live in today, there is no organisation, government or private, who can hand on heart say that they are completely safe from cyber attacks. What you endeavour to do with a lot of the measures which are put in place, both in the government's policy, the ASD, essential aid, etc., is to harden you, to make you... A lot of attacks are automated, and it's opportunistic, knocking on the door. You harden your front door, they'll go down the road and go to somebody else. If there was a state actor, for whatever reason, decided to target any organisation in New South Wales, there would be a limitation to how much that could be withstood. But so the answer I gave this morning was, I can't give that assurance, but I wouldn't expect any other organisation.
No, and I don't want to be rude, but I just want to, because it's a pertinent point. I don't think the expectation would be that you inoculate every government institution from a cyber attack, but if there's standards that were supposed to be met to give you the degree of comfort given the risk analysis that was presumably done, and those standards cannot be met, and that's what I'm asking, can they be met? If they can't, then Are we in that situation now? So that let's say, let me give you a hypothetical. Mr. Perrottet meets with you tomorrow and says you can have the 22 million. Can we come up to those standards in 4 weeks?
No, impossible.
Right.
Impossible.
Thank you. Thanks.